Excellent. Welcome back. Hope everyone had a lovely lunch. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to go ahead and move on our agenda to item F, which is a discussion around the Oregon Passenger Rail Draft Environmental Impact Statement. We have a team that's going to be joining us. And Mr. Garda, would you like, shall I go ahead and turn it over to you? Okay, wonderful.
You must have new ones. The buttons are sticky. Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, my name's Hal Gard. I'm the Administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you for having us before you. We're doing something a little bit different, and it's because, and what we're really bringing to you is kind of the results, the landing point, the arrival point of the draft EIS for the Oregon Passenger Rail Project. It has been in the works longer than I've been in the position I'm currently in. So it started.
Attest.
You can attest. and it started before me. And unlike a typical environmental process, which is really an engagement between the federal lead agency and the DOT, Oregon put its stamp on this, and I think ended up with a much stronger, much more rigorous process. The state stood up a governor's leadership council to really help guide, direct, and provide a level of engagement on a high-level environmental impact statement that I don't think has really ever been duplicated. And so I don't want to steal any thunder. I have a spectacular leader sitting next to me who really helped drive this entire process. We were going to be joined by Representative Nancy Nathanson, who worked in lockstep with the good mayor. She is in mandatory training, and she sends her regrets because she really did want to be part of this rollout. So with that kickoff, I am going to introduce, well, she doesn't need any introduction, but ex-Mayor Kitty Piercy from the city of Eugene, and then some of the technical overview, Jennifer Sellers, who is the Passenger Rail Program Manager, is going to walk through, and then I'll try to see if I can put paid on it. Are we good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair Boehne and Commissioners, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I more than appreciate that we're at this point. It's been a long haul, so to speak. On the first, I think we need the first. Oh, here. Okay. I'm look. That's how techie I am. Okay. Whoops. Back. So. The passenger rail overview really fulfills many things that we've been working on for a long time. As probably each of you is aware, we initiated this particular rail line, and I couldn't believe it. It was 1994. That's not that long ago. It's a pretty short timeline. And have made $77 million in improvements. We did the second trip down the corridor in 2000, got the train sets, which I think was a phenomenal step forward in 2010, and showed actually our commitment to the corridor and to Washington State. Because I think it's fair for me to say this, since they said it to me, some of the people who were working on this in the legislature in Washington were ready to call it quits with Oregon because they just saw nothing happening for a very, very long time, and they were committing a lot of dollars and a lot of legislative power behind their rail system. So, and then ARA came along, and the sad news for us was that we were not ready to accept the funding that was available at that time for rail. As you know, we didn't have a rail plan, and you have to have that before you can receive dollars. So the OTC was a real strong partner in getting the rail plan in place, and also in helping us move forward with this preferred corridor. So we're very, very appreciative of the work of the Commission and look forward to future partnerships where we can keep moving this down the road. I just would add to that I can't even remember what year it was, but it's right around the ARA time that Eugene really loves the rail, and so we were very interested in sort of ramping it up again. So we had a summit that sort of kicked off trying to get everybody re-engaged in in the rail discussion. And that's how I think I ended up getting engaged in the leadership and all the other things, is because I was part of trying to get the legislature and the state to renew their commitment to rail. So next is, as you know, we're part of the Pacific Northwest Rail Corridor. That's 466 miles of rail. And between Eugene and Springfield is 125. And we set out to gain approval for the preferred alternative, pursuing, and we had to do a corridor investment plan, which includes a NEPA and a service development plan. Here are the friends who all made this happen. That would be the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and the Oregon Transportation Commission, with special thanks to David Lohman for his leadership on the state rail plan, and to Sean and Mark Frohnmeyer for their support of the work that we did on the preferred alignment. We are grateful for that partnership and think it really made a difference. So then we went to the Tier 1 environmental impact statement. We looked at rail alignment, service improvements, communities with stations, trying to seek identifying the preferred alternative. This next slide is a really important one because it shows you, as Hal said, how deep and wide we went to find out what the people in the corridor wanted and cared about. And I think just to give you an example, the Governor Kitzhaber is the one who established this. We had a leadership council that was made up of mostly electeds from up and down the valley. We had a corridor forum that had 49 individuals on it, 21 cities, 5 counties, 6 regional governments, 4 transit organizations, and other reps and groups. And then we did these outreach strategies, which you see here. I call this kind of the Cadillac of outreach. These are the way we went about trying to find out what people really wanted. And I concluded from that experience that sometimes the purpose and need is different than people originally think it is. Sometimes when people think about things, they think about some big dream they have that's out here. But when you really talk to people, as we did both wide and deep, you find out what they really want. And what they really wanted was to improve their frequency, the convenience, the speed, and the reliability of passenger rail. All else would be nice, but those were fundamentals that people really cared about. And the need was to increase intercity and regional travel demands and limit the rail system and build the rail system capacity and meet the demands from the public. That's my bit. You're on.
Okay, give me that.
I got to turn it on. Chair Bain and Commissioners, thank you again for your time today. My name is Jennifer Sellers. I'm the ODOT's Passenger Rail Program Manager. So the purpose and needs shaped the goals and objectives of the project. And we're going through these goals and objectives because it's very important. These are integral to how we chose the alternatives, selected the ones to go into a deeper dive in the DEIS, and then when we went to select the preferred alternative. So goal 1 is to improve passenger rail mobility and accessibility to communities in the Willamette Valley. The supporting objectives were to provide a viable alternative to the car and for the service to be reliable and frequent, as that's the best way to serve the communities and to build ridership. Goal 2 was to protect the freight rail capacity and the investments in the corridor and to maintain safety. An objective was not to increase conflicts between passenger and freight rail. And then goal 3 was to plan, design, implement, maintain, and operate a cost-effective project with the objective to develop a strategy that could be reasonably funded. And then goal 4 was to provide an affordable and equitable travel alternative. So goal 5, it was to be compatible with the passenger rail investments that are planned in Washington State, with the objective to ensure the service in Oregon is compatible with that in Washington to allow for regional connectivity. Goal 6 was to promote the community health and the quality of life for the communities in the corridor. And then goal 7 was to protect and preserve the natural and the built environment. The objective and this goal do support Oregon's commitment to reduce greenhouse gases and to slow climate change. So the two build alternatives and a no build alternative were analyzed in the draft environmental impact statement. So alternative one follows the existing Amtrak Cascades passenger rail route with some planned improvements. So the improvements would be sections of mainline track and then sidings that would be added where needed to accommodate the additional passenger rail service while maintaining the current level of freight rail operations. So determining where these improvements will be made will be done in the service development plan in discussions with Union Pacific. So by 2035, which is the time frame of the DEIS, the route would serve 7 passenger rail round trips per day. So in comparison, today we have 2 round trips plus the Coast Starlight. So this would go up to 6 for the Cascades plus the Coast Starlight by 2035. Alternative 1 would also serve the existing stations in the route, and these refinements would be necessary to maximize the improvements. Alternative 2 would involve construction of a new mainline track and the sidings throughout the majority of the route where it would be adjacent to I-5 and to I-205. And then the new mainline track would also be added adjacent to the existing Union Pacific line north of Oregon City. This alternative would have the same number of round trips added, so 6 plus the Coast Starlight by 2035. So the NEPA regulations require that an alternative no action to serve as a baseline in the EIS, and the no-build alternative follows the existing Cascades line with no improvements or additional service added. So during the process, the members of the Leadership Council and the other stakeholders, they expressed a desire for true high-speed rail, which would be speeds faster than 125 miles per hour. So that's why when we were asked about this, we say, well, it's actually higher speeds. It's not true high speed. But so the high-speed rail concept vision report was developed in a response for a closer look at what true high-speed rail would take in the Willamette Valley. And so this vision provided for a longer-term context for investments to upgrade the speed, frequency, and reliability. So basically, we would need its own dedicated alignment for true high-speed rail. And it's not supportable within the 20-year timeframe of the EIS. How did you want to talk about the ultra-high-speed rail?
I just want to kind of make a clarifying point because I do know that we have two commissioners who are sitting on Washington's ultra-high-speed ground transportation task force. It is a different thing. It is a different animal. But it is not a concept that is incompatible with our current passenger rail intercity service that we have now and what we would propose in the future. And I think the main point I really want to make is that as the Cascadia region grows, that intercity connectivity, there is a need for multiple alternatives. And so as our friends to the north have demonstrated, they can't actually find enough alternative modes of transportation to support both the industry, the population within that area. So they both have light rail, they have commuter rail, they have expanding passenger rail service, and that itch still isn't scratched. And so even with intercity short commuter flights, they still are looking at, with industry support and money, the ultra high-speed ground transportation. And they use that as a term of art because they actually want to include everything from true high-speed rail over 200 miles an hour to maglev, which is just a different flavor of the same animal, to even things that we haven't figured out how they work, like Hyperloop. So thinking large, but really reacting to demand. We're not there yet. We're still growing. I think we can demonstrate a need or certainly a strong desire for additional passenger rail, but our population is going to have to continue to grow. Those congestion pressures are going to have to continue to mount. And then I think we will start seeing more and more demand for additional alternatives. So with that.
I just wanted to add one thing. In the discussion, we heard a lot all up and down the corridor from folks who didn't feel that we were as well connected to rail as we need to be. So we have a whole lot of work to do just to be sure that everybody in Oregon has a way to access the rail system that we have, and that it becomes more and more a route that everyone thinks about using in one form or another instead of just a segment of the population. And I think that's a really important issue, getting that transit connected everywhere, getting those commuter buses connected everywhere. Those would make a really big difference for how people can access rail in our state. We didn't actually talk about that, but I just thought it was important to say it.
So quickly, I'd like to run through the two alternatives that were selected and analyzed in the draft environmental impact statement, with also some discussion about the no build and the current service. So the two build alternatives and options that were evaluated, they were using those project goals and objectives that we discussed earlier, and they must all meet the purpose and need. For trip time, the estimated travel times assume the stops at all of the existing 5 stations, and each additional stop would add time. So the current scheduled travel time from Portland to Eugene is 2 hours and 35 minutes. So alternative 1 would decrease the current travel time by 15 minutes, whereas alternative 2 by 33 minutes. For higher speeds, alternative 1 maintains the current maximum speed of 72 miles per hour, and alternative 2 would allow for speeds up at 120 miles per hour due to portions of the alignment being on that is dedicated to passenger rail, so you don't have that freight interference. Alternative 1 has a capital cost of $870 million to $1 billion, and that doesn't include maintenance costs, whereas alternative 2 has costs of $3.6 to $4.4 billion. The higher costs for alternative 2 are primarily attributed to the need for the new alignment and the need for new stations. The ridership estimate for year 2035 for alternative 1 is 739,000, and that's when the full 7 round trips are in place. Alternative 2, actually, we were kind of surprised at this, would have a lower estimated ridership, but that's attributed for the need for the stations to be new and to be moved outside of the city centers. As a comparison, the ridership today for 2018 was 101,900, whereas the Coast Starlight was 58,976. And note we currently have 2 round trips for the Cascades. The ridership estimate for the no build in 2035 is 197,000. So alternative 1 would improve the service to the city centers, whereas alternative 2 would bring the service outside of the city centers. And then alternative 1 would have less of an effect on the natural and the built environment because of staying within existing alignment, whereas alternative 2 would have the higher environmental impacts because of the need to build new stations and a new alignment. So for the stations, this outlines where the stations would need to, where they are currently and where they would be in alternative 1 versus alternative 2. So as you can tell, alternative 1 would use the 5 existing stations, which are located in or near central business districts, and alternative 2 would use 5 stations, but 4 of them would need to be new. Portland Union Station would be used, but then the Eugene Station would be moved to Springfield. Albany would be outside of Albany, and then Salem would be outside of the city center of Salem or Kaiser, and then Oregon City would have to be moved to Wilsonville or Tualatin. I'd also like to note that the current stations, the state of Oregon, and the communities have invested a significant amount in these stations.
I just have one minutes back to.
Okay.
Preferred alternative 1 is based on the following features. It improves ridership, which is really important. We can't get where we want to go if we don't improve ridership. Rail service to central cities where the people live, more people are. Reduced environmental impacts. Ability to phase implementation, which I think is very important. And for me, that's part of being not just addressing what's in front of your nose, but that you have to look way down the road and say, that's where we're headed. We can take these steps to get there as both money and support becomes available, and lower capital cost. I will wind up my part here by saying that as I think about this, having been the mayor of Eugene and the work that we are doing in our state and across this nation right now around climate issues, I think there's a meeting here where a vigorous conversation about how investing in rail could help our state meet their goals, I think is something that we should all be contributing to, because I think people tend to take transportation and environment and set them like this, and they really need to be really strongly thought of together. I'm hoping that Congressman DeFazio will be a leader in that and will help us be leaders in that. So for me, I just wanted to say in my most vigorous way that I think there's a moment in time here where we can get rail support through the doors of working on climate issues, and I hope that we take advantage of that.
I'm going to kind of wrap this up and kind of walk through the next steps. So this felt like an appropriate place to sunset the role of the Leadership Council. At this point, we worked through the extensive comments that we received through the public outreach process, presenting the draft environmental impact statement. From this point, once we resolve those, the work really lands with FRA to complete their analysis, resolve any final outstanding issues, and they are the ones that will issue the final record of decision. So I do want to make sure that I want to thank both the mayor, and I wish Representative Nathanson was here, but actually the entire council, because I think it was more than just providing leadership and providing a solid foundation, but they provided the community engagement and elevated the discussion to a point that folks really understood both the importance and the value of the effort overall. And I think
went to a lot of meetings.
And they went to a lot of meetings. So, you know, that was one reason for this, but there's more work to be done. So once we have that rod, we have a clear set direction moving forward. The development of that service development plan is going to be key. How do we get there? And we continue to have the same issues that we struggle with, and a couple more. So how do we pay for it? I mean, the funding discussion is there. It's ongoing. I know in my heart that we're going to continue to grow, and we're going to want this, but it's been hard. It's been really difficult. We've had a couple of tragedies on the line, which has impacted our daily service, which has made things difficult, and has actually exacerbated some tensions between us and our partners up north. And so when I'm preparing to take a very, very hard look at this service development plan, I'm looking at all options on the table. And it has to do with the mix of our fleet, where we operate, what equipment, where and how. Is it something that we turn over to Amtrak? Is it something that we look at an Oregon-only model, and how do we expand within the confines of the state? I'm actually opening up that book very, very wide. This provides us the short-term goal between Portland and Eugene, how to increase service, how do we make sure we connect, but I'm not necessarily sure that the model that we currently in place is the absolute right one, given some of the struggles we've experienced. So I just wanted to share that with the commission and let you know my thinking moving forward, and we will be back here as some of that information gets a little more fully developed. So I think we're there. Any questions from the commission?
Well, let me also say thank you. And if you look at the changes that have happened in the time frame of starting this work, it is it's just interesting to see how quickly, yet sometimes not, things change. Mm-hmm. We do have new opportunities in terms of funding, and we never know what might come our direction. And so this, I hope, is one of those examples where you go a little slow in order to go fast. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that we are ready? I do believe that our state will continue to grow, and I think if we let go of some of these assets, or we haven't pre-planned and we're not ready, then we won't be prepared for those opportunities when they come about. So I think we do stay positive. It is something that our state needs, and I do think that in this work we've seen that it will grow appropriately to meet the needs of our state, so long as we continue to keep that, these plans in front of us. So we don't have the identified funding right now, but I think it will be able to be something that we identify in the future. I really appreciated, Madam Mayor, your comments in terms of the GHG work and the, how this is all linked together. Mm-hmm. You're right, it isn't just one piece, it's a combination. And so bringing communities together and make sure that they stay committed to the work, I think, is also important.
With all due respect to Hal, I guess I would say, too, that there's value in keeping relationships as tight as you can along the western corridor for many reasons. Mm-hmm. And this is one way that we do that. And so I think there's value in recognizing that we wish we could find a way to be tighter with California, and we need to maintain a good, working, strong relationship with DC and on up to British Columbia. So I think it's a worthwhile thing.
Yeah, I hope my comments weren't misconstrued. I was simply visiting all the ranges of possibilities in terms of how we operate the service.
That's your job.
And we continue to work to strengthen those relationships also from a policy perspective to make sure that there's support on both ends. So please, commission members, if you have comments or thoughts.
So thank you all very much for the hours and hours of meetings that you've endured to get here and your perseverance and commitment. I agree. You know, you never know how the timing will come together. Mayor Piercy, I really appreciate your comments about the convergence of environmental and transportation interests, and I think that is an opportunity to think more creatively about transportation, including transportation funding and investment. It's interesting to think about how much those two things in particular, but a range of things are now coming into play that have us thinking about transportation. We had a conversation over lunch about essentially this very topic. So, and trying to think in an interdisciplinary way, and to take the notion of multimodal transportation statewide to all corners of the state, because it addresses both the fact people need choices and they need a variety of options, and that the needs of our citizenry continue to evolve, and also because I think there is an opportunity there by taking advantage of the interest in having a more multimodal system to get some other things, including environmental values and goals promoted at the same time. I wanted to ask Hal, when I worked in the U.S. Senate, I recall that the Congress identified 6 high-speed light rail corridors nationally, and one of them was Vancouver to Eugene. Now, I hate to say it, but years and years later, Commissioner Simpson and I, as you mentioned, sit on a 2-state, 1-province task force that is looking at ultra-high-speed light rail from Vancouver to Portland. So what happened to Eugene? I mean, why doesn't it extend this planning that corridor was identified decades ago? So why does it only go to Portland? Why not down the valley? Because I think it should.
So we put our money into play, and there is a look. The preliminary program and the preliminary study guide was really looking at the anchor population cities, and those big cities are Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, which drive the majority of the ridership. But by us putting our money in, so that we are part of it, and I think we're punching pretty hard with 2 commissioners sitting on that committee. The inclusion and consideration of ensuring that line, if it is ever constructed, can be extended to Eugene is pretty much assured by your participation.
Okay, great. And I do want to ensure that whatever we need to be doing on that commission to get us to Eugene ultimately, that we're doing, because I see tremendous opportunities to not only knit the region together through ultra-high-speed light rail, but that ultra-high-speed rail, heavy rail, but to get the state to be shrink the distance between cities in the state, not just Portland and Eugene, but the whole economy of the state, and in particular the economy of the valley. And so being able, as we've been told, as Orlando and I have been told, to get to Seattle in an hour and Vancouver in another hour means you could get to Eugene in less than an hour. So that sounds pretty good to me.
It absolutely does, and the economics have to work out. I think the main component of that is understanding that the Cascadia mega region is a mega region, and our economies are connected. So we need to continue to make that case.
I would just add that there's a lot of rail enthusiasm in Eugene, and as more options are available, more usage really has occurred and will occur. And people there are hot for this idea. They just waiting for when it becomes a feasible thing to do. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Commissioner Callery, please.
I noticed on on one of your slides that you show potential station development on Alternative 2. Are there any potential station development opportunities on Alternative 1?
So Commissioner Calorie, thank you for the question. The challenge that we face is that the more stops you add, the slower your service. And the optimal minimal distance is about 35 miles between stations. So our current spacing is pretty perfect. There's a bit of an outlier in Oregon City, but they paid for that station and they invested in that stop, and we continue to honor that consideration. But there is a point of diminishing returns as you add stops, and so we were shooting for the sweet spot.
I'd like to add, we also have a station stop policy that we developed in conjunction with the state of Washington. Representative Nathanson was on that committee. So if a community is interested in adding a station, they can submit kind of a business case analysis and what they would contribute and to show how they would offset, such as the slowing of time, the ridership, things like that. So we do have a policy in place for a community to lobby to add a station.
And during our conversation, Corvallis played vigorously. They're not on the corridor, as you know, but they really love the concept of rail, and so they upped the communication by bus to get people to the rail. But that's something to think about. How do you make a place that's so avid to participate be able to do more and more, and what makes sense economically to do that? And of course, it's got a big university there as well, so it makes good sense to kind of play around with that idea and try to figure out innovative ways that you can bring them closer into the loop, is what I would say. And they would make, and they make great advocates too, so it's a win-win in many ways.
One additional.
Please.
Is it too soon to have you characterize some of the public comment from your hearings?
Actually, we do have those results in, so if you'd like, I can run through it quickly. Let me find that page.
Let me just ask quickly, do we have anyone who wants to provide public comment on this? Okay, so that just helps me know how to navigate. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
So we had 5 open houses, and we also had an online open house during the public comment period, which was a federally mandated 90-day period. So we had a total of 176 people attended the open house and the public hearing events. And then, so the key themes: support for Alternative 1 as the recommended preferred alternative was the primary support. Others included input relating to improving the frequency, the schedule, and the reliability, the technology, the innovation, implementation, and feasibility. Others included input on funding and costs. Some of the common themes included improvements to passenger rail are needed, but funding is a significant issue, and therefore Alternative 1 would be the best option. They also talked about high-speed rail, or the speed of the trains in general. People want faster trains. And then they had some suggestions on increasing ridership. So we had good input. We had some media at some of the events, and I believe Eugene, we had maybe 80 people at the Eugene event, so we had a good turnout.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments? Okay, thank you so very much, and please give Representative Nathanson our best, and to the committee and to your leadership, both as mayor and carrying this forward as well. It's an honor to work with you. Thank you so much for your commitment. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have a decision, and that is a potential STIP amendment. And Mr. Strickler, I think I'll turn it over to you. She had signed up
Chair Banning, members of the commission, Director Garrett. Let's try that again. Okay.
Excellent.
Chair Baney, members of the commission, Director Garrett, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Chris Strickler, Highway Division Administrator, about 2.5 months in. And as you saw from Mr. Mather earlier today, big shoes to fill, and I'm doing my very best to get up to speed. One of the things that I wanted to provide right now was an introduction for the next 3 topics, really, and that is more a conversation around STIP amendments in general and what we've been bringing to the commission. And I've had the opportunity over the last few months to sit in the back and really kind of observe those things that seem to be resonating as it relates to each of the STIP amendments and the type of work that goes into that. So I guess I'll start with the reassurance moment, and that is 1, that we've been paying attention, and 2, that we hear you. And as we start to look at the opportunities in front of us to provide some remedy to maybe some of the moments that we've had before us, we're going to look at those in several different areas. And so it's really more of a programmatic approach to the cost estimating and to the project timing and all of those things that really have us coming back multiple times for STIP amendments, rather than a project-by-project approach. Now, obviously, there will be individual projects that would come before you for good reason, and I almost break these down into 3 separate categories. 1 would be there's those things that, frankly, we probably need to look within ourselves and decide that we have an opportunity to fix them, and that's starting potentially all the way back at the scoping phase to provide that kind of upfront assurance when we kick off the project. There's probably the second set of things, which is frankly those things that you would trust us to be able to provide input on, but that even we can't give you full certainty, the ever-changing market conditions, those types of things. And then I would say the third are those really good project-based decisions where you know more today than you did before. And we think it's a good idea to add those as part of the project. I think in the past, maybe what we've brought forward has been an aggregation of all of those at the same time. And what we want to do is we want to provide 2 things. One is some background work on maybe those earlier moments where we can potentially bring forward better programmatic decisions earlier in the process, but then have detailed conversations with you about those scope adjustments or those projects that really appeared as one early on in the process, but really have shifted to a different type of project or that have additive moments associated with them that are just a good business sense thing to do. And that way you can dive into those things and you can really see what those scope adjustments are and really focus the energy there as opposed to maybe some of those more upfront things that we want you to rely on us for. So as we start to look at all of these different options, I guess what I'd say is one of the things that we're working on right now is a plan that would get us to kind of a better outcome in some of those discussions. So I think my request is hoping to have some time and some latitude over the next several months as we start to put details together for maybe how we can best inform some of that, and then come back and maybe share those with you. The other thing, by way of introduction, is all of my comments really are centered around programmatic elements for the overall STIP program. They're for multiple projects. They aren't for any individual region, any individual discipline group, or any individual project per se. And so what you have before you now is the moment where Mr. Chickering and the rest of his group get to bring obviously project-related STIP amendments your way. But I want to kind of reinforce the amount of effort and detail and work that's gone in over the last several months for them to really get the projects ready. So this is potentially that last moment that you see them right before they go to construction. So with that, I want to celebrate the work that they've done to get us here. And that's for all 3 STIP amendments, and then provide some assurance that we're working on the other, and we'll be coming back to you as you allow.
Well, and that is a priority for the commission as well. We want to be able to use the consent agenda as we've discussed a little bit differently and not have some of this need to come to us. But there's also that transparency piece of, wow, there's a really significant increase in cost, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we have identified why. And so I also hope that part of that is the interaction between the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee and some of the opportunities for us to look at project delivery and ways in which we can maybe be more efficient, or things that are working well, or things that maybe we could be adjusting to. So there's a resource there for you. And, you know, one thing that we do have is confidence in the team, and part of it is that transparency piece. So thank you for walking us through that as we have in the last probably year and a half. So I'll take the 3, however you want to give us those. I think we'll probably start with the I-105, and we'll just go from there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Sonny Chickering. I'm the Northwest Region Manager. That's Region 2. I'll be participating in both items G1 and G2. I'm going to give you a little bit of an explanation of where we are on both of these projects and how we got here, And then my area managers, who will introduce themselves in a moment, will describe to you what we intend to do and what we're recommending your approval as courses of action. The first project is the I-105 Willamette River Connections project. This is in the city of Eugene. This project is currently in its first phase of construction. There will be multiple phases leading to completion in the spring of 2021. During the first weeks of the first phase, which happened in the November timeframe, there was a great deal of travel delay and congestion experienced throughout the community. Not only in the project site, but on the local arterial system around the I-5's project area. As a result, the region has elected to perform a comprehensive project review to identify potential mitigations. These are items that could improve the situation both from a travel delay and a congestion standpoint to address some of the concerns that were expressed by local citizens, elected officials, etc. And so the request before you today is for approval of up to $750,000 of additional funding to implement some of the mitigations that have been identified. I want to sort of set the stage here. The region is fortunate to have 8 major construction projects in the Eugene area during the 2018 to 2021 STIP. The bad news is we have 8 major projects within the Eugene area, all within a 3-year period, each of which has its own traffic control, traffic staging challenges in and of itself. But when the 8 projects are being completed over a short period of time, they actually are going to be occurring at the same time period. So if you're a citizen moving from one side of the city to the other, you may be impacted by 2 or 3 of our projects on any given day. And so we need to be conscious of that, those impacts. The reason we have so many projects all at once, and this is unusual, I would say in my experience, more than a decade with the department, we've never had this many projects at one time in one community. But these are high priority routes for the state. They have deteriorating condition. We're updating infrastructure to current standards, and in many cases we're adding multimodal features such as bus pullouts and ADA ramp and signal upgrades. We also have one modernization project that's funded with JTA savings from the I-5 Beltline interchange project that's been moved down to the Delta Beltline interchange. But we need to manage our construction staging to minimize, as I said, the travel delay and the congestion. And we also need to take into account that we have 2 major events that are coming up in the Eugene area in the near term, one being the 2020 U.S. Olympic Trials, and then in 2021, Eugene will be hosting the World Track and Field Championships. And so we need to make sure, our intent was in particular to have this project completed before the 2021 track and field, but the 2020 games had not been announced at the time we bid this project, so it was not taken into account at all in the staging. Just some basic information. The project worked items include removing an obsolete bridge and improvements to 7 other bridges, or replacing bridge joints, decks, railing, a variety of assets associated with bridges. So that's the primary function. And this is essential work that will require multiple and extended continuous lane closures to complete. So this isn't a situation where we can just show up in the middle of the night and in the morning it's magically open and there's no impact to the public. We're going to have to find a way to do that that the community can live with. This is a pretty detailed picture of the location, but each of those colored areas on this segment of highway is actually a bridge. So this is an elevated freeway section, and there are 8 different bridges here. And you can imagine how much traffic control is associated with a single bridge in a single location. Here we're trying to work on 8 different bridges over an extended period of time. And it sort of gives you a sense of how much impact we're going to have. I think with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Franny so that she can discuss a little bit about the mitigations we've arrived at.
Do we have a video? Let's see.
It's connected with your... Oh, I missed the video. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see how we do it. There's a video that shows the construction of the removal of the obsolete bridge. Whoops.
Not too far. Jackie, is there a button we're supposed to push here, or can you do that?
If not, we can go past it, but it's kind of cool to look at this video.
We're on I-105 in Eugene, where crews are working on replacing the bridge deck surface. We've removed one half of an obsolete bridge, and now we're actually putting the surface that folks will be able to drive on. When we switch traffic to the east side of the bridge, what people will see is that most of the lanes are going to be concrete. Those are our permanent lanes. There's actually going to be one lane that's asphalt. That lane is...
Perhaps we could just stand that down.
We've had great success with videos today, so we will go ahead and maybe just forward that for the commission to watch it.
There you go.
We can watch it on,
Okay, you can
we'll
watch
watch
it
it when we
all
watch
the
this
time.
morning's
Okay.
video too.
Thank you for that smooth transition, Chair.
Yes, absolutely. If you want me to point at anything, just let me know.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, my name is Franny Brindle, and I am the Region 2 Area 5 manager, and my office is in Springfield. I drive through the project area every day to get to work. Let's see if I can move this forward. I can't. We're stuck. We're frozen, Jackie. I need my slides. Okay. There we go. Okay. So the I-105 Willamette River Crossing Bridges to 1st to 7th Street viaducts, a 2-year construction project, as Sunny mentioned. It will impact traffic. In response to the traffic congestion that started in Phase 1, Stage 1 of the project, where we were removing the obsolete bridge and we were taking out a lane of traffic in each direction, we narrowed the traffic down, and in early November started getting complaints. We were seeing that folks were using or seeing that there was construction underway, and knowing that there's other bridges in Eugene that cross the river, everyone scurried to the other bridge crossings. Many people went to the Coburg Road area and crossed to Ferry Street Bridge, and the Coburg Road is already at or exceeding capacity in a good day. And so we wanted to address these concerns as they were coming in. Our region manager, Sunny Chickering here, tasked us to evaluate options that would reduce traffic congestion and delay, and also look at cumulative delay at the upcoming stages and phases. Because we knew just the removal of the obsolete bridge was a minor part of what was coming in the future. We were going to have some ramp closures that could really have huge impacts. So we convened a team of folks, including the contractor, Wildish Construction, members of the OBEC design team, and ODOT staff to evaluate the elements of the design, the construction, and the traffic management plan to find ways to reduce the delay. The options were evaluated with consideration toward traffic safety, worker safety. We looked at freight mobility, impact to schedule and cost, and impacts to the completion dates, with an eye toward those 2 important events that Sunny mentioned, the Olympic Games and the World Cup. We did not, however, consider options that would compromise design standards or reduce overall resiliency of the bridge or safety of the bridge. The team came up with over 30 recommendations that were viable, with considerations that would reduce traffic delay. We then placed them into 4 tiers under the direction of our Highway Division Administrator, Chris Strickland. And Tier 1 were the options that would give us immediate results. They were tangible and have immediate effect to traffic relief. Tier 2 were options believed to be good ideas but could be negotiated with the contractor to achieve. Tier 3, options that could provide benefit but that are not quantifiable. And Tier 4, options that could be explored further to determine if they're viable and what their cost would be. So immediately we knew that the ramp from the Valley River Center to I-105, the Delta westbound, southbound ramp, we would not want to close that during the holidays, and that was actually in the contract staging plan. So we stopped that closure immediately and deferred that closure to a future stage in 2020. We also modified contract language to add the Olympic trials. And upon the tour that we took with you, Chair Boehne, in the city of Eugene, we started partnering with the city on signal timing adjustments. Tier 2 are options that were estimated to cost between $300,000 and $500,000. Accelerated construction during ramp closures, looking at multiple shifts during daytime work, looking at early strength concrete, providing the public with early and adequate warning. Accelerated construction during placement of high performance concrete bridge deck overlays, and modifying contract language to allow only one ramp closure at a time, preferably during the summer months. Tier 3 would provide benefit but are not easily quantifiable. This would increase the budget between $0 and $50,000. This included the installation of traffic cameras on Coburg Road signals and to connect those cameras to Trip Check. Also connecting existing cameras that are on signals on 6th and 7th Street to the Trip Check cameras. And Tier 4 options that could be explored further to determine their viability and cost. Redesigning deck strengthening details to allow the general contractors to work with rather than bringing a specialty contractor. This would also involve changing cast in place bridge rail to precast barrier and modifying the bridge rail type to steel tube rail and utilizing existing curb. Non-construction options including enhancing the communication plan, expanding the outreach and targeting the outreach with a new schedule and targeted audiences, and doing an alternative transportation options campaign to encourage new behaviors as we anticipate this is the new paradigm going forward with traffic congestion in the area. So trying to get the drivers out of the SOVs and into different modes of transportation. So as you know, the Oregon Transportation Options Plan was adopted by the OTC in April of 2015. The purpose of the Transportation Options Program is to strategize traffic demand management options. This is perfect for this kind of project where we have heavy traffic congestion during single occupancy vehicles during the commute travel times. So we are exploring other modes and other strategies such as carpooling and other congestion mitigation strategies. Many believe, as I said, that the congestion on our system is becoming the new normal. The city of Eugene has a greenhouse gas reduction goal of 50% of 2010 levels by 2030 and an average annual reduction of 2.5%. We think that trying to incentivize other modes of transportation would be a good idea on this project and in the future. So we have convened a team of folks from LTD, Point to Point, the bus service itself, and our active transportation group to look at what we can do. We're looking at individualized marketing with targeted audiences. Also working with, we want to work with the employers in the area. We've got the Whitaker area and a light industrial area nearby to I-105. We'd like to work with the employers to see if we can shift commute times and work hours. We want to work on soft infrastructure investments. In fact, we have one in place right now with a bike share network that we currently have a bike share program that just got off the ground last year. We're installing a new set of bikes and a bike share element over at the Valley River Center, which is a very nice location because you can cross the Valley River Bridge and get to the downtown area. We have 5 bridges in the Eugene metro area that take traffic over the bridges over the river, excuse me. We have 5 bike ped bridges, so that's 10 bridges in the area That's more than many communities have. And we would like to take advantage of those other options and those other modes. If we can get the contractor and through negotiation to target closures of the ramps at certain times where there's less congestion, and we know those times ahead of time, we believe that we can do a targeted campaign and work very diligently to try to shift those modes during that time. We're also exploring working with LTD on the Coburg Road route where they're showing 10 minutes of delay to increase bus service for a targeted amount of time. We think that this will also build really good partnerships into the future, and it is something that we will communicate well with our MPO and our Lane Act and see what we can do moving forward with other projects as well, as we're looking at these other 6 or 7 projects that we're delivering. So we are requesting, we need additional funding for the STIP amendment. We are asking for $750,000, $500,000 to compensate the contractor for modifications to the work schedule and to accelerate the work, $150,000 to increase the CE budget, and that's covering staff costs to revisit the scope, schedule, and budget that we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of work since November, and we'll continue that effort. And we'd like to add $100,000 for additional public outreach and for a transportation options campaign. Thank you for this consideration.
So a quick question of the improvements that you are seeking additional funding for, how much of that will help the 8 projects as a whole? I suspect that the $100,000 that would go to the media outreach and to the community outreach is going to be talking about the projects as a whole, maybe working with chambers and visitors association and then that type of an outreach. So that's not specific to this first phase. But if I understand you correctly, the rest of it may, will maybe the added camera feeds or et cetera, will any of that really benefit the other projects as we go forward, future phases as well?
Yes, that's a very good question. The camera feeds that feed into TripCheck will benefit all the projects. The communication plan, we build upon a network that we've actually already started building upon when we did the Beltline paving project and invested in a lot of public outreach for that project. So each one of these have cumulative impacts as far as positive for outreach. But a sizable amount of that $100,000 will go to the transportation options campaign. And we see it as a dovetailed approach, communication, transportation options, and then also the know before you go is for all the projects.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That way, if it makes it clear that we're really trying to add a package here for future growth that's happening in this area.
Exactly.
So questions or comments from commission members? If not, we should take them individually so that there's clarity of what the approvals are or are not. Okay, so I'd welcome a motion. Okay, great. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Great. Ms. Nell.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, I'm Lisa Nell, but actually Sunny Chickering, our region manager, is going to start this one off.
Great, sorry, right ahead.
Not a problem. Thank you, Chair. This project is on Interstate 5 between Salem and Woodburn. It's an interstate maintenance paving project. The design is nearly complete. With approval of today's request, the project would be submitted for bidding sometime next week. So we're hoping that you vote favorably today. As the photos show, the asphalt paving throughout the 12.5-mile project length is deteriorated and in need of repair. You can see several specific problems there. One of the most obvious is rutting. If you've driven that segment anytime recently, you don't have to do a lot of steering in some cases because it's hard for the car to get out of the ruts. We are in the 11th year of a 9 to 11 year anticipated life cycle for this pavement, so it's imperative that we take action soon. This is sort of a just-in-time project. On a similar segment of I-5 north of Woodburn up to the bridge at Wilsonville, we had to advance a paving project a year earlier than expected. That was in 2017 when the surface deteriorated at an alarming rate after that hard winter that we had. And we don't want to have the same experience in this segment to the south. This is a map layout of the project. You can see Woodburn in the upper right hand, and then the end of the project is actually at the northern end of Salem, just south of the Chemawa Road interchange. The current project budget was scoped in 2015 prior to inclusion and adoption in the 1821 STIP, and this points out the time lag in our current system. For example, today we're out scoping projects that are going to be programmed into the 21-24 STIP for construction in 23 and 24. So it's 4 to 5 years from the time that we do an original scope to the time that we actually bid the project and begin construction. The anticipated work includes 3 major items. The 3 major items that are shown on the slide above there. Primarily it's paving, but there's also bridge work, both membrane work, waterproofing the decks and plugging joints, and then some deck surfacing and replacing. So project increases. This is a large request, $9.7 million, and I feel like I owe you an explanation. What are we getting for that money? We have 4 major contributors to that. I'm going to let Area Manager Nell talk about the first 2 items. But I do want to point out that they were not included at all in the 2015 scoping effort because the Enhanced Work Zone program, the Work Zone Safety Pilot Program, didn't exist in those days. And the public information outreach wasn't something that was on our scoping plans, something that we would be looking out for. So those 2 items weren't included in the original estimates at all. We are requesting an additional $1.25 million to cover the cost of using waterproofing polymer membranes rather than spray-on membranes. That's a technical explanation. We're doing the same thing, but the product that we're using is a little more expensive, but it's more suited to the application, this particular application, and it'll give us a better life and a better performance. And we also need to do some more intensive grinding and leveling of the bridge decks. They also have suffered rutting, and we need to take care of that before we put the new asphalt over the top. In addition, asphalt paving increases make up the bulk of the construction request. And I point out in the letter, the agenda letter, that the cost of all asphalt paving related work items finished and in place has increased from an estimated $57 a ton to $90 a ton since 2015. That's an alarming increase, and it's something that obviously we didn't anticipate at the time that we were doing the scoping. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ms. Nell so she can tell you a little bit more about what we intend to do.
Hello again. Thank you, Chair Boehne and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Lisa Nell. I'm the Region 2 Area 3 Manager, and Area 3 is Yamhill, Polk, and Marion counties, so just so you know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we went through to vet this project with our stakeholders and go through a stakeholder process that was pretty robust. So during the design process for this project, ODOT staff collaborated with stakeholders. Oh, pardon me, I'm not advancing my slide here. Back to the goal. The goal to design a project that balanced the demands upon the highway with maintaining mobility and safety. By sharing project information early on in the design, we were able to identify potential conflicts and resolve those issues together. To ensure we communicated with key stakeholders, we attended the Mobility Advisory Committee several times. This group has key stakeholders, including the Oregon Trucking Association, the Association of General Contractors, AAA, freight haulers from the heavy haul industry and the Oregon Mobile Home Association. We also held constructability review meetings with contractors, Oregon State Police, FHWA. We had 2 emergency responder meetings with the state police, fire, medical, and ODOT incident response crews. We also had 2 meetings with a transit provider to discuss strategies for using transit as an alternative option to transportation. And ODOT staff had individual conversations with industry partners, including AGC, AAA, and the Trucking Association. During these meetings, the team conveyed that they had explored design options and ideas for staging and work zone configurations. We received several comments for consideration, including concerns about worker safety, delays for users of the highway, and ways we could partner with everyone to ensure success. In response to this feedback, the team refined the project design to strike a balance between delay time and providing a safe work environment. As a work zone safety pilot project, it was important that the ultimate solution included several work zone safety features. Let's see. Those features include smart work zone queue warning, temporary transverse rumble strips, and these will actually be the first time that we've used those on I-5. Rolling slowdowns, these were used during the Wilsonville to Woodburn project that we recently completed. Radar speed trailers, wider separation from the work zone, which is important for worker safety. Increased police enforcement, which is going to be higher than in most projects. And finally, one thing I didn't put on my slide, but is a speed reduction down to 50 miles per hour. Additionally, it was clear that we needed to implement a robust outreach plan and have a contingency plan to manage issues that may arise during construction. So the team developed an outreach plan with several strategies to be used, including outreach methods and tools that have been successful with other ODOT projects. We needed to tell a story, or we need to tell a story moving forward. The selected consultant will develop outreach channels and messaging about traffic delays, construction details, and work zone safety to communicate well in advance of the project, tell all people to plan ahead and consider alternate travel options, to keep businesses in the freight industry updated and informed if issues arise, establish advanced notification mechanisms that would include things like GovDelivery, Trip Check, websites, and social media, and target specific stakeholder groups to consider transportation options, telecommuting, flex schedules, ride sharing, and alternative routes. Pardon me. The Traffic Control Contingency Plan is a way for ODOT and the contractor to be better unified when challenging situations occur. This plan addresses job site access and flow options when unforeseen incidents arise during construction and result in additional traffic delays. The plan is based upon an integrated approach when developing the final project plans and in coordination with the contractor. Additionally, an emergency response and communication plan will be developed with the selected contractor. The plan will accommodate access into and through the work zone for all emergency responders, including but not limited to law enforcement, medical, fire, and ODOT incident response teams. Overall, collaborating with our stakeholders has led to a project solution that balances mobility with effective work zone safety elements. And that's what we have for you today. Thank you.
So, Chair Boehne, if it wasn't clear during my presentation, I should have highlighted the fact that our original plan for this project would have resulted in delays of up to 1 hour for traffic on Interstate 5. And that was eventually deemed to just be more than our agency was comfortable with, than the mobility committee was comfortable with. But the trade-off was, in order to get that travel delay down, we couldn't be as aggressive with our traffic control measures, our protections for workers, et cetera. So that's why Lisa and her team went to all the extra effort and went back to the Mobility Committee several times and tried to work to a solution that was more palatable for all the parties. And in the end, we were able to get that delay down to 30 minutes instead. 30 minutes will still feel like a lot when you're on I-5 trying to get to work or trying to get home, et cetera. But we're hopeful through our outreach campaign and the funds that we're asking you to provide that we can help address that, prepare the public, keep them informed, and get them through this project in a reasonable condition. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions?
Yeah,
Please.
thanks, Sonny. So I'm curious, the project was already going on correctly? Correct?
No, this project has not bid yet. We are at final plans. The final plans were held up during this process of coming to an arrangement on what the traffic control might be. If this is approved by the commission today, we'll go to bid. We'll submit our plans and specifications for bid next week. I think the bid let date is actually in March.
And does the department hold the agreement with the asphalt plant, or is that coming from the contractors with the markup?
That would be the responsibility of the contractor to identify their source.
So do we have any analysis on how the price has increased that much? I mean, that is a drastic increase. Do we have any internal insight on what caused the price of that to come up so high?
The figure that I gave you, the $57 to $90, that's all inclusive. So that's equipment, labor, the actual material itself, and all of the processes and machinery necessary to get that laid and in place. The cost of the actual mix from the plants, that went from $22 a ton to $50 a ton. So that's a portion of that larger increase.
But it's still double for the material.
Yes.
Okay, and then the last question is, are individuals or companies who are going to be bidding on this own their own rock yards and asphalt plants?
I'm not as knowledgeable about the capabilities of each contractor as others on our staff. Our expectation is that for a job of this size, we're going to be having some fairly large companies bid on this, and most of them do have access to their own plants. That would be my guess.
And then you got 30% contingency in here. Was that because of the complexity of the project, or do you feel like potentially we're going to go over what the potential number is to kind of give you some leverage to chew into that contingency?
Actually, that 30% is unusual. So our normal contingency, and I brought this information, I thought this question might come up, so thank you for asking. I have it written down. So normally we apply a different level of contingency depending on where we are in development of the project. So normally at scoping we would start at 40%. When we got to our design acceptance package, which is basically the footprint, we think we have the scope nailed down. We reduce that to 30%. At preliminary plans it's 20%. And then at advanced plans, which is where we are now, we would normally be down to 3.5%. But for this project, we actually advanced the design. So we were late getting started on this project, but we didn't want to miss this construction year because, as I mentioned, we're worried about getting to the end of that lifespan.
And the season's coming up.
And the season's coming up. So we put together what we call a rapid design team, and they designed this project in a quarter to a third of the time that we would normally take to do this. And for that reason, on this project only, we allowed them a higher contingency at this late date.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost it. So then what % design did we get to, at least to this point with?
We're at near final plans, actually. So again, with your approval, I think our folks sitting behind me here are ready to push the send button early next week.
Okay.
But when this letter was written, we were at advanced plans.
So then the proposal of the increase for the preliminary engineering, would it be to get to 100%?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the
The
question?
design, you have the proposal from 469 to 1.1 of the increase for preliminary engineering. Is that going to make up that difference of that expedited design that you're trying to get to here?
Yes, we're comfortable with the number that we've given you as a final total.
Got it.
That's an extraordinary change in terms of the cost of the material. So hopefully that's not a trend that we see throughout, our bidding in general. I know we don't have that magic wand that I talked about earlier that just made things all right with the world. So do we have concerns or questions that we still need answers on in order to be able to go forward? Please.
Yeah, my only concern is double dipping here. If somebody has their own rock yard and they're making margin on that and then margin on the work, it just, for an increase and a significant cost increase like that, it just seems a little greedy if that happens to be the case. But if it's not the case, then that's the cost,
Well, there's a bid process, so that would be to the competitiveness that would, I suspect, probably be a disadvantage if they were, but, I mean, do you have a comment to that?
I don't, Commissioner Simpson. There were others in the agency that would do a better job of answering that question. I think that what we need to do is trust in the bidding process, and as long as they're satisfying and complying with our bidding requirements and the specifications, I think that we need to trust that the low bid is the efficient way to go here. But we can look at our specifications, how we frame those, to see if we have a hole or a weakness in that, and we can address that concern and others through the processes that Mr. Strickler's described.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I could add a little more. So because of the stage that we're in right now, i.e. it hasn't gone to bid yet, what our bid prices right now reflect is our best projection of what the estimate will come in as. And so we don't have contractors that have already been predetermined. And so as far as those specifications that Sonny identified, that bid price going from that 57 to 90 wouldn't be reflective of any of those scenarios because it hasn't been bid yet.
So this essentially is our guess of what we think it is going to be, and hopefully the bids come in significantly lower than that. Is that, okay,
Great.
okay. Other comments or questions? Okay, if not, I'd welcome a motion.
So moved.
Okay, further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, as we
Yep.
transition to the next project, we have Mr. Cooley, our Chief Engineer, coming to the table to talk a little bit about our bridge program in the Portland area. Now, he's going to identify areas within Region 1 or the Portland area, as well as some in Sonny's region. But in general, what you're going to see in front of you is a bridge strengthening effort as it relates to load rates for several of our bridges that are part of our ongoing load rating program. And rather than me butcher the details, I'll let Mr. Cooley address those. But again, what I'd like to say, just by way of introduction, is from a process standpoint, we're probably not in our best position right now because we're coming at the very end and we're asking for an approval for something that we need to get out and do the work immediately for.
Okay.
And so we recognize that moment.
Excellent. And I want to afford you as much time as necessary, but also recognizing that we are a little bit behind. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Wonderful to see you again.
I will try to talk fast. Chair Boehne, Commissioners, my name is Steve Cooley, and I am the Chief Engineer for ODOT. I'm here today seeking approval for a STIP amendment that would move $10 million from our current STIP bridge program to our major bridge program. This is needed to fund the strengthening efforts required to meet current load rating requirements on 10 bridges, over half of which are in the Portland area. The fund would come from reducing the scope of the Fremont painting project, as described in the agenda letter. The Fremont Bridge project is scheduled for a multiple phased approach to complete the entire painting of that structure. And what we're taking the money from the existing project, and the scope of that work would be moved into a later phase. So we're just going to swap it out. The bridge engineering section is currently in the final stages of completing an initial load rating for all publicly owned and operated bridges that are open to public traffic in Oregon. This is a federal requirement, and ODOT is started this effort in 2004. There are approximately 6,900 state, local, and other government agency bridges in Oregon that meet this requirement. ODOT, through intergovernmental agreements with the local agencies and others, has been performing the load ratings for the majority of the bridges. Due to the large number of bridges to be completed, the strategy for the last 5 years has been to complete as many of the load ratings within our existing budget and resources by a deadline of March 31st of 2019. ODOT has been coordinating our efforts with Federal Highway, and this is the final deadline that was agreed to by them, and they have been very good partners in working with us on trying to achieve this task. The strengthening for the 10 bridges we are discussing today is the remainder of the bridges for that total effort. Once the load ratings have been accepted by the Federal Highway in March, the structures requiring additional strengthening will have 90 days to complete the construction, or the bridges would be posted with a weight restriction. In your handouts, you have a few maps with the locations of the bridges. As I mentioned, 5 of those are in Region 1, 4 in Region 2, and 1 in Region 4. Oops, sorry. The STIP amendment, if approved, will allow the use of state funds, which provides us the flexibility to design and construct the repairs in an accelerated fashion, which would minimize impacts to freight mobility and the traveling public. These repairs would now be maintenance projects, and which several of our repairs are planned to be completed by our own maintenance crews. We have an emergency full service contract, and others may be contracted out through our region procurement process. The majority of these bridges will have the repairs completed within that 90 days. There are 2 bridges that we anticipate will take longer, the Steel Bridge and the St. John's Bridge. This is due to the size of these structures and the potential number of members requiring the strengthening. Most of the design work is underway, and we are taking every effort we can to accelerate the work to minimize the time of any restrictions. We've been communicating with our industry. We've provided a couple of updates of this effort with Motor Carrier Transportation Advisory Committee. We have our heavy haulers on that team and most recently we had an update to them last week. As we finalize the load ratings and firm up the scope of the work, the details of the plans will be communicated out to all the stakeholders in the coming weeks. All of these bridges are being monitored, and any immediate safety concerns would be addressed as necessary, and currently there is none. Although this request will provide the funding to complete the remaining bridges for the initial load rating effort and repairs, which has been a big effort, and I don't want to take anything away from my staff, they're really putting in the effort to get this last push through to get it done. But this is one of those areas where we could have done a much better job in our strategic planning of this effort and timeliness. And as we move forward, looking at changes as how we manage our bridge program and putting us more in alignment with our strategic business plan. So with that, I can
Thank you
entertain
for
questions.
acknowledging that, and I think that just, again, shows that we want to lean into continuous improvement and always look at ways in which we can do things just a little bit better. And so I think your team is fantastic and they've done great work, but I think it's that keen eye for where areas in which we can continue to improve. Do we have questions on this particular request? If not, I would welcome a motion. Mr. Callery, the motion man today?
If I could get the
Yes,
microphone
yes.
going. So moved.
Excellent. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Wonderful
Thank
to
you.
see you, and please give your team our best. Director Garrett, we have the consent agenda, and I don't believe we have any changes.
That's
I'll
correct,
turn it to
Madam
you.
Chair. No one has communicated any conflicts or concerns with the consent calendar items. So with that, I would ask the commission to approve the consent calendar en bloc.
Okay. I'd welcome a motion.
You're on a roll.
So moved.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So we will, I know we're running just a skosh behind, but I think we will go ahead and just take a couple minutes, change out some, they are, okay, wonderful. So maybe 5, Jerry, is that okay? And, okay. Excellent, excellent, thank you. We're doing it right here. Yep. Here we are. I just can't believe the cost increase.
scores. I mean, we're scoping them 3 or 4 years out. That's been my complaint about the STIP. Well, you're probably in the resources and you're just your best bet, and you know, costing it. Now, if it wasn't ODOT, everybody else, they live with it. But we squeeze money. So. Okay, we'll just sit right here.
I understood you needed 8. So Heather, why don't you go on the other side? Oh, yes. Okay.
Actually, I'll start singing, and then when I finish, wherever you're seated, that's a good idea.
Oh, what are we doing? You gotta go there. Oh, okay. There, okay, you stay there. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Either that or you have to start liking both.
Okay. Well, I love those.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Cummings, thank you. Paul, it's a curly head thing, you know, we got going on.
Anybody else have any handouts you want to pass around?
No, you're limited to just this one.
We are on, everyone's using microphones and kind of the same, so this is
You ready to go, Jackie?
on the video as we've been doing before. Okay, great, just making sure. So I'll just open by saying thank you so much for making time to be here. I hope that this is the beginning of a number of meetings that we have together. I think we share the goal of our state's economy and making sure that Oregonians have what they need in terms of livability and vibrant economy. So I'll turn it over to Director Garrett, and really wanted to say thank you so much for making time to be with us, and look forward to a continued relationship in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. And what I thought I would do is just say a few words to set the context. Because as Chair Boehne indicated, I believe this is the first of many conversations that will ensure that we are meeting the mandates that are embedded in House Bill 2017. It's a new way of collaboration and cooperation, and some new information that needs to be populated in plans that exist or may exist as we move to the future. So I guess with that, Madam Chair, what I'd like to do is just welcome the good folks here. To my left, we have folks from Business Oregon, the Infrastructure Finance Authority Board, starting with Chair Andrea Kloss, who is the Infrastructure Finance Authority Board Chair. Thank you for being here. My colleague, Chris Harder, who is the Director of Business Oregon, and then Chris Cummings, who is the Infrastructure Finance Authority Executive Director. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Chris has ODOT roots, so hopefully he feels familiar in this. Moving to the center portion of the dais, we have our friends from the State Aviation Board. And Martha, you're going to have to help me navigate this. I think you are now acting director. You were a board member. I think you come February when there's a new state aviation director coming on board, you'll move back to the board. But Martha has worn many hats, but she's now at the tip of the spear for aviation. With Martha is Heather Peck, the planning and program manager at the Department of Aviation. And then to my right, we have our friends from the State Marine Board, and truly appreciate them, beginning with Board Chair Val Early. Oh, there's Val right there. Director Warren of the State Marine Board, and then I think it's Janine, I apologize, I'm going to say Bullock. Oh, excellent, of the Boating Facilities Managers here. So I truly appreciate you being here. because I know the demands placed on your time, and for you to spend an hour is significant, but I think it's foundational and fundamental to where we are going to go from this point forward here. I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge the staff work that preceded the workings here, so this should not be a foreign conversation to anybody. And we truly want it to be a conversation. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and last thing I want to do is talk at you, but I think context is important. But I think I can speak for myself and certainly the commission, my commission, that this is a dialogue. This is a partnership. And I think that's where we begin this discussion, as a partnership, truly on the planning and the policy expectations, the processes, and the coordination that's required in Section 6 of House Bill 2017. Now, for context, Section 6 of House Bill 2017 does many things. We're going to speak about a specific section, the first being that it affirms the Oregon Transportation Commission's responsibility for what I would term traditional transportation plans. It states that the Oregon Transportation Commission shall establish policies for the operation of the Department of Transportation. The new language has us develop, or has the Commission develop and maintain state transportation policies, including but not limited to policies related to the management, construction, and maintenance of highways and other transportation systems in Oregon, including but not limited to aviations, port, and rail. Now, recall that there are currently 10 statewide plans related to the different focus areas of transportation, with the overarching policy document here at ODOT being the Oregon Transportation Plan. Now, the OTP sets statewide policy for the entire transportation system. There are 9 mode or topic plans under the OTP. These refine and apply the OTP policy to these focus areas, examples being the bike ped plan, the safety action plan, the highway plan, the freight plan, so on and so forth, 9 of those. Together, the OTP and these modal and topical plans constitute the state-level transportation system plan and the multimodal long-range plan required by state and federal law regulations. So there's an affirmation of that embedded in House Bill 2017. I would submit to you there is also an expansion of OTC responsibilities, and I will just read verbatim. The bill language goes on to say, we will develop and maintain a comprehensive 20-year long-range plan for a safe multimodal transportation system for the state, which encompasses economic efficiency, orderly economic development, and environmental quality, and a comprehensive long-range plan that must include but not be limited to aviation, highways, mass transit, ports, rails, and waterways. It must be used by all agencies and their officers to guide and coordinate transportation activities to ensure transportation planning utilizes the potential of all existing and developing modes of transportation. And then really the core of why we are sitting around the table today. In coordination with the State Marine Board, the Oregon Business Development Department, the State Aviation Board, goes on to speak to the cities, counties, mass transit districts, and others. Develop plans for each mode of transportation and multimodal plans for the movement of people and freight. We thought we'd begin the discussion with the agencies that were specifically called out. That's why we were here. Embedded in House Bill 2017 Section 6 also speaks about project lists to be embedded in these plans. That's a future conversation. We intend to take that charge up, no question, but those are future conversations. I guess I would end finally with the expanded charge to the OTC. The bill goes on to say, as the plans are developed by the Commission, the Director of Transportation shall prepare and submit implementation programs to the Commission for approval, work with the Commission to carry out the plans, shall be assigned to the appropriate unit of the Department of Transportation or other appropriate body. What it says is we need to work together to ensure that we are coordinated, that we are integrated, specific to the plans that each and every one of our agencies, boards, and commissions engages. And then it comes to the Commission to make sure that that's all integrated and we move forward. So I think that's where we're going to begin this coordination effort, I need to articulate what I think is really a process and discipline of coordination that we use specific to our statewide plans here. Statewide plans developed by ODOT all follow a similar process, including common procedures for coordination with agencies, with stakeholders, and with public outreach and review. These methods are designed to meet the OTC's public involvement policy, which is designed to help ODOT comply with the state agency coordinating agreement that ODOT has with our sister agency, Land Conservation and Development, specific to their state planning goal number 1, which is citizen outreach or citizen involvement, as well as some of the federal rules that we have to play by. So, our objective today, first, Garrett, get through all that. That was my first objective. But the objective today, I think, is really maybe fourfold. Simply to begin a Section 6 dialogue between our agency professionals, as well as our respective boards and commissions. I think the second objective is to attain an understanding, a shared understanding of the statutory requirements, understand the status, the impacts, the implications to our existing planning and policy development efforts, and finally, identify potential courses of action for the sequencing of our work to ensure the successful implementation of House Bill 2017, Section 6. What I'd like to do now is turn to Jerry Bohard and ask her to do a very quick walkthrough of the inventory of plans that were provided in the materials. And once that is done, turn to our colleagues and have them share their thoughts, their perspectives for this ongoing conversation. So with that, Jerry, if you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Garrett. For the record, my name is Jerry Bohard. I'm the Transportation Development Division Administrator. Good afternoon, Commission. And what I would like to add a little bit to some of the Director's comments is that when he talked about some of the outreach that we do, so for instance, I know that Chair Boehne has served, we have a policy advisory committee that is very reflective of stakeholders that are impacted, in this case of the bike ped plan. So it wasn't just bike ped advocates that sat on there, it was freight folks that sat on there, it was local governments that sat on, anybody who was affected by it. That's been a common practice, and we've also had technical advisory committees that get to really the staff level. So I think we've been very purposeful, and particularly since the freight plan, of really thinking about that they're multimodal plans. So they weren't just geared towards that mode in particular, but understanding how that mode interacted with other modes, understanding what the barriers or some of the synthesis might be. We also have a number of advisory committees that have been formed for a variety of different reasons, whether it's our Freight Advisory Committee, which is legislative, versus our Public Transportation Advisory Committee, which is something that as a commission you brought forward. But I bring that up because particularly on the Freight Advisory Committee, many of the folks are represented, sit on that committee, Aviation, Business Oregon. But to be honest, we have not played as much with the State Marine Board. But we've also done other things a little bit more creative around procurement. I think it was actually even before Chris's time in the freight program. But when we were doing the freight plan and we did that procurement, we did it in such a way that Business Oregon could use that RFP. And they did a ports master plan. And the ports master plan, I think, really got it to what the ports do, whether they're fisheries or economic development. And at that time, Commissioner Alan Brown sat on that work. So there have been other forms of connection. And then finally, while we're still figuring out what it looks like, getting to, I think, the last point that the director made around implementation, you know, and we've, in the division, now have an implementation unit, which Amanda Peets oversees. Now, most of that has been more around active transportation right now, but as we start to understand what implementation means, we've tried to set up a foundation that exists. So just really quickly, one of the things that we put into your packet was, and great work done by Lucia Ramirez, that's sitting back there in the audience, was around just sort of the status of where we are with different plans, and I think you're going to hear a little bit more, particularly around the aviation plan. So the aviation plan has always been part of the umbrella of the Oregon Transportation Plan. And you'll hear how the board takes action on it, but typically we have brought that plan in front of you all just so you can hear what's gone on and support it. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, one of our newest ones. The Oregon Freight Plan, you actually just made a few updates to that because of the FAST Act, and that's actually one where we have to update it every 5 years. The Oregon Highway Plan, and while we talk about it being a little outdated, because when it first started in 1999, so everybody can do the math and realize that, it really was one, though, that the commission kept up to date. We have policies in there around tolling. We have policies in there about bypasses. So you asked us to do additional work, and we did additional work on that. So in a lot of ways, that one has been a living document. I'll leave Business Oregon to talk about the Oregon Marine Plan, which sort of doesn't exist. The Public Transportation Plan, that's the latest and greatest. You know, September wasn't that long ago that you all took action on that. The State Rail Plan, and you heard a little bit of conversation about passenger rail today. Also the fact that they have to update that every 5 years. So there's things that start to happen that update this plan. Our Transportation Options Plan, we're proud to say we were one of the first ones to do, and I'm not sure if other states have done that, to have a Transportation Options Plan. And I think you heard in one of your STIP amendments, Franny talking about the Transportation Options Plan that they need to do for the work that they're doing. Our Safety Action Plan, again, Troy Costales, I know, was here earlier this morning. So you can start to see that a lot of the plan and the work that's been done, you hear it on pretty much a regular basis, you know, as part of your agenda. I think one thing when you look at this, so the point that the director made about the 20-year project list, our documents primarily have been policy documents. But what we have done is look at investment strategies and really look at, okay, so what are the implications if we get more money, if we get less money, even if we have the same amount of money, but what does inflation do to that? So we've really thought about it from an investment strategy and understanding what it means to that mode. Because I think what's really important about all of these plans is that they represent that mode. So the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan isn't about our bicycle and pedestrian program. It's about the needs of bicycle and pedestrian for the state of Oregon. Where you as an agency may have authority over might look a little different, but we're really trying to be visionary about what we're trying to accomplish with each of those modes. So that's my quick run through, and we'll take it from there.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, hopefully that provides at least a jump-off point for a conversation, and I would suggest that maybe we just move from left to right and just have our friends from Business Oregon and the Infrastructure Finance Authority just share some of their thoughts specific to the various plans, areas of engagements, whether they're strategic or statewide, the existence or non-existence, so on and so forth. So I defer to you on that, but that would be my suggestion.
And Mr. Harder, please do push the button so that we can capture your comments too. Yes.
Red lights, so we're
and
good?
so that folks
Okay.
know they're a little fickle too. So if you push it, feel free to be aggressive.
That's
so, yeah.
my apologies.
So, no, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Garrett, thank you for having Business Oregon here today. I am Chris Harder, Director of the agency. I'm going to talk a high level, and there's a reason I brought smart people with us here, Chris Cummings, and then obviously Andrea Kloss, who is chair of one of our very important boards for the agency. I want to first start saying I think why I'm excited to be here is I think we have shared goals around economic development. We have different functions, but we have a lot of areas where we collaborate together. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize is while this is a conversation about how do we enhance that, I want to start by saying I think that collaboration is fairly strong now to begin with. So obviously with different pieces of legislation and new work that presents new opportunities. But perhaps on the tactical level or the strategic level, key programs like Connect Oregon, Immediate Opportunity Fund are very important for the work we do and very important for the work that you do. One of the things I do want to highlight, and it was referenced earlier, and I hope it's a point of discussion, is one of our responsibilities in the larger transportation plan is the marine transportation systems plan. So it is certainly something that we are eager and interested to start. I think one of the conversation points today or for a follow-up meeting is where we kind of find funding for that. Currently, to date, we haven't received appropriation from the legislature to fund that work. It is something that we think is important for the overall transportation needs. Why don't I, with that, I don't know if Chris, we do have a whole bunch of areas that we do collaborate and opportunities to kind of enhance that. If you don't mind, I may turn it over to some of my colleagues to fill in some of those details, and I hope it's also an opportunity as we go through that we can kind of have a dialogue along the way. So thank you again.
Were you arm wrestling over there?
Were. But apparently it's a Business Oregon thing not to be able to get this on the first try. Chair Boehne, Commissioners, Director Garrett, thank you for having us again. My name is Chris Cummings. I'm the Assistant Director of Business Oregon for Economic Development. And along the lines of why we're here with Chair Klaas is want to let you know that what the Infrastructure Finance Authority is. So we have Business Oregon, of course, right, and there's a Business Development Commission, but the Infrastructure Finance Authority is charged with a certain number of programs statutorily, and one of those programs being ports. So we have port funding, we have a port program where if you look through this document, obviously that I handed out, there's some discussion in there about potential port planning and port coordination related to intergovernmental agreements that we could have with ports, or that we do have with ports, and that could frankly assist with some of the planning in Senate in House Bill 2017 as it relates to particularly capital improvement plans, 20-year planning for ports, and so on. We frankly haven't, I think that's a follow-up discussion, is how can we get to that coordination so that we can hit those. Obviously that's been brought up to today, but not just the system plan itself, but this capital improvement plan, which will certainly help our local ports as they move forward to legislature for funding or the governor's office, et cetera. So we look forward to some of that coordination in the future. Obviously, it'll take some time. The system plan, as Director Harder has mentioned, is one of those things that we've worked with ODOT and discussions with on potential for funding. Obviously, it's an expensive project. There isn't, at least in our experience, and maybe my friends over at Marine Board have some other thought, isn't necessarily the same federal level of agency that provides funding for a marine system plan. So we don't necessarily see those in other states like we see rail plans and bike ped plans, et cetera. So it is a challenge for us in the state. We do feel it's important, though. And with that, Chair Klaas, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So again, my name is Andrea Klaas. I'm the chair of the Infrastructure Finance Authority. I'm also the executive director of the Port of the Dalles and a member of Oregon Public Ports Association. And so this marine transportation plan is near and dear to ports' hearts. We rely, so I'm on the Columbia River, about 182 or 186 river miles from the mouth of the Columbia River is where my port is, and then there's a number of ports on up to the east, and then obviously down along the Oregon coast. And we, a number of years ago, did an economic impact study of how ports are impacting in a positive way the economy of the state of Oregon, because our main charge as a port is economic development. We all do it in different ways. I do it primarily through industrial land development, but one of the things that I've seen on the Columbia River in particular is the huge increase in cruise boats that are now coming up and using the Columbia River. And we also have a large pike minnow fishing season from my port in the Columbia River. And I think one of the things that we don't know, though, is really how is that river being used? How is the coast of Oregon being used? We've had businesses come to the port interested in short seas shipping. And what that essentially is it's a smaller ocean-going vessel that can take goods from inland and then ship them down the coast or up the coast, I guess, to California or to Washington and then overseas. So I think it's an area of economic impact that we just don't understand, and we really need to get a better handle on it. The other thing that why I feel that it's very important is that in the case that there is a Cascadia event, that is how things are going to be moved into Portland, up and down the coast, really to help the recovery of Oregon. And so not only is it an economic issue, but I really feel like it's an emergency preparedness issue that we really need to be taking a look at, looking at and addressing. So, thank you.
I very much appreciate you noting the resiliency piece, because I do think that that is, again, another thing that we have as maybe an untapped discussion point that we are going to be the ones that folks look to, and we will be the ones that will get our economy back online sooner rather than later, hopefully. So anyway, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Great. Simnut, please.
I'm waiting to take my direction from Jerry. I've realized that that's always a good thing, so.
I've learned the same.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Martha Meeker, Sisters Oregon, and I am currently, as Director Garrett said, the interim director for the Oregon Department of Aviation. But normally my day job is the chair of the Oregon Aviation Board. As you might have known, the processes for aviation are very heavily influenced by the FAA, particularly the FAA funding. They provide about $34 billion annually to support the infrastructure in aviation around the country. And so as such, we very closely in our master planning, matching what their requirements are so that we qualify for that grant funding. However, we do have interlinks to the Oregon transportation planning process. For instance, for our Connect Oregon, we will use what we call our Oregon Aviation Plan that you heard mentioned earlier, which is a look across the state where we do joint planning conferences with the FAA. We take a look at each and every public use airport, whether they're state-owned or not. We will look there, we will note what is at the airport and what is needed at the airport for the longer term, 20 years or so out. We marry this up with master plans that are done at each of the airports. That's required by FAA. As I said before, FAA drives a lot of our processes. We will use those highlighted goals and needed infrastructure, for instance, when we do Connect Oregon grants. When we have our review as a modal committee for Connect Oregon, we'll rate programs that are in those FAA plans, in our Oregon Aviation Plan, on our capital improvement plans. Those, of course, become higher than something that comes out of left field all of a sudden with a request for grants. Also, now that we have grant funding from our recently increased tax on fuel aviation gas, we use that for our own, when the Oregon Aviation Board looks at grant applications for those, we apply those as well, those infrastructure programs identified within our master planning process. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, because I've also found that the more coordination you have, generally, the luckier you are at finding synergies. I also recognize that aviation is not an island unto itself. It really doesn't make any sense for us to strengthen an airport if there's not a roadway nearby with a bridge that we can get stuff over. So I thoroughly appreciate the fact that we need to, as an agency, ODA, to be with you, and as a modal committee with the board to be in coordination with you. And I also appreciate the fact bringing Business Oregon on here, because when they're doing an economic development, if it's an opportunity for us to pitch into that community and make it even stronger, sometimes we can shift things to match up so we can make that stronger package. So thanks again for having us here, and I look forward to the future coordination.
Senator Johnson, who states if you pave a mile of roadway, you can go a mile. If you pave a mile of runway, you can go around the world.
You betcha.
So that is really, and kudos to the aviation groups in aligning your resiliency and looking, especially in our area where we'll be the FEMA staging area for the Cascadia. So
Yeah.
a lot of great work happening there too. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention, we also make sure that the area commissions and transportation in the various regions, they do an active job of overseeing and rank ordering our, even before it gets to the board, helping us to establish what's important in their regions. So thank you for all your acts out there. They've been awesome.
Good. Thank you for that.
I don't want to have to turn on the red light. So I'm Val Early. I'm the chair of the Oregon State Marine Board, and I'm going to just kick it right over to our director here in just a second. I just want to tell you, Chair and members of the board, commission, thank you for having us here. I think that this is an opportunity. We are a small agency focused on recreational boating and often have coordination with the ports. And I appreciate the Cascadia reference, because I think that in the future, when we start to look at recovery for Oregon, small recreational boats are going to play a very large role. And so I think that that's going to be very pertinent in the future. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to staff, who we depend on tremendously.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, Director Garrett, Larry Warren, the Oregon State Marine Board Director, and again, thank you for having us here today. I guess we're supposed to say why we're here. We're here because the weather's not conducive to boating. So we thought, why not go to a meeting today? And so, you know, in all sincerity, Chair early covered, we're really a recreationally focused agency. And so, to be candid, we're probably the oddest fit in this bill. And even as we met as staff and up to this, we thought, how do we fit in? And so, really, from our perspective, and Chair really touched on it, we're a small agency. We have a small budget. But if you go to a public boat ramp in this state, we probably have money into that facility. We also fund the Marine Law Patrol that goes out on the rivers and keeps the recreational boaters safe. So, and we help them purchase their boats. So we have assets like that around the state. And that's oftentimes why people will look at our agency in these types of situations. But for us, we're always looking, you know, to make our dollar go further, and so we're looking for what we can get out of a situation. And for us, the more we understand what you're doing as a commission and where the transportation's headed in the state, the more we can help advise our board on how to spend their money, because sometimes we might reorder projects based on things that are going around the state so that we can get better prices on contracting and different things around the state. So that's the thing that we saw the most beneficial to us in this, but we certainly would add value in sharing how we think about our investments around public facilities.
Hopefully we have an opportunity to leverage those limited resources, because that certainly is something that we would want to be able to partner in as well. So Director Garrett or Ms. Bohart, in terms of discussion going forward, how would you like to continue?
It does seem to me that there were several touch points that were identified as we kind of went around the dais here. I think we have some authoritative documents that we all can plug into, so to speak. The plans, the various IGAs that I think probably more focused in the IFA conversation with regard to ports. But we do have authoritative documents that I think we better need to better understand and see how they integrate with each other here. Director Warren spoke to assets. We all have assets, and for all intents and purposes, transportation is a network, and it's a system, and they touch each other. And so how do we leverage those opportunities? I thought you were very articulate in taking advantage of that. I don't think we've done that. We need to start thinking about that and reimagining the timing in which we engage the opportunities when we put a project out on the ground. How does that interact with maybe some type of dock that may be very close to a bridge that we're doing? Similar situation to that mile of pavement, mile of runway discussions here. I think there are those types of opportunities. So I think what we need to do, again, understanding the context in which we, or the backdrop in which we're engaged here, is to fill some long-term planning, policy, and project goals specific to the House bill in Section 6. Now, we don't have a clock on this. We don't have a specific due date. But I think I would be very comfortable if I would go before any legislative panel saying, but we have had a conversation that starts the discussion of how we align and integrate the various plans, projects, and assets that we have to better inform the conversation, because I think in turn that becomes the jump-off point for now having this greater conversation about projects as we look to the future here. You have to have some foundational documents, make sure we're in sync, make sure we're leveraging both our human resources, I would submit leveraging our financial resources, and then move forward on that front. So I think just already with the work that's done and what was articulated today, I think we have at least a foundation to stand on and continue to have staff start to work saying, how do we now take the charge given in House Bill 2017 and start to fulfill it and move things forward? And watching conversations Director Harder spoke to, informing conversations about funding for plants. Now, that may be a timing issue, but I think it's important, as was said, there are some strategic plans. There are those intergovernmental agreements. Maybe, just maybe, there's enough there that we can move forward in this conversation with that, knowing that the financing of a statewide plan may be a little further into the future. I know the Aviation Department, I think in 2019, I mean, you're upon us, I think adoption of your plan is imminent, I would say. So what's that mean? Understanding that we have participated in, but bringing it back to the Commission to truly understand those relationships. And then we'll get to learn a little bit more about the State Marine Board, to be very honest with you. I think you may be a small agency, but you've also communicated to me that there may be opportunity here. It's incumbent upon us, I believe, to exhaust all those avenues. And I think that's what I heard today, that there are avenues that we can continue to explore, again, against the backdrop of this piece of legislation that has us coordinating and moving things forward.
So I guess my recommendation might be to hear about those plans. So you work with the outdoor plan, right? The state, I'm going to get the title wrong, but recreation is part of our bike ped. So understanding where those connections might be. I was intrigued by his safety comment. You know, is there something that we're missing in the safety action plan that we should be better coordinated? Certainly, I think aviation, they have been part of the umbrella of the OTP, so I think understanding where you guys are with that and how you see it furthering. And quite honestly, I think with the Marine Plan, understanding where the gaps are. So I think back to the OTC work plan that you guys just talked about today and where we see sort of the vision for the state as a whole as we think about transportation. So I think understanding the direction that these are going, some are in places and some don't know yet. I think that would be really helpful for us to, I think, start the conversation and then maybe tag on to a little bit around Connect Oregon, because we have new rules and this is really where I've had the pleasure of really working with Martha, is being on the Rules Advisory Committee. So anyway, what some of their thoughts there, I think both those would be helpful, I think, for you all as a commission, because of stuff that's coming up for you. So that's my suggestion.
I think that's great. And I also would just, I don't want to overcommit my colleagues, but we are citizen members of a commission who can assist in discussing the challenges that you might have, whether it's the funding that's necessary for the planning process. We are a resource and partners to be able to do that. If it's the safety and the, you know, we right now, in terms of safety on our roads and communities for OSP, so we are supporting them in terms of a budget request to say, look, this is relevant to the system as a whole. And so if we look at ourselves as partners in this system as a whole, count us in as a resource and as partners in being able to advocate and to tell the story of what that means in terms of our state's economy and what the needs are, especially in smaller agencies. I mean, if there's a way to leverage us even, please, that's what we want to be able to partner on.
So,
please.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know I have one. There it is. So, so I think this is to Jerry. So as I look at this statute, it says, if I'm reading it right, that the Oregon Transportation Commission shall, D, in coordination with the State Marine Board, the Oregon Business Development Department, the State Aviation Board, cities, counties, et cetera, develop plans for each mode, right? So ultimately, these are OTC plans or OTC approved plans. So describe to me how are we talking about amending existing plans, creating new plans, and so just
I think that's some of the
confusion.
Nuance may not be the right word, but that we're trying, because of the changes, is trying to understand. And I think, you know, I think that's the place, because it's above my pay grade, that's a good conversation with the directors and the chairs of understanding the implications of that responsibility to you as a commission.
Right.
And really, how would you want to play that conversation? Is that something that you want to take on, or what are the ramifications of you taking that on?
Well,
because I think ultimately there may be clarification that we need from the legislature as to what I think this esteemed group sees as the roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, because, this seems, I think you're right, there is a nuance here in the statute about whether it would be best to have our sister entities developing plans that they're proposing up to us for discussion, or whether we are supposed to be developing draft plans to send to them. So it goes to what in coordination means.
Right.
Are we coordinating on plans that are being developed by these agencies, or are they coordinating with us on plans we're developing? And I think or is it something else?
Right.
Yeah, it was meant to.
And what I'd say is, if you think about the partnerships we've had, the rail plan and whatnot, we've said that, Hal's shop or the subject matter experts, my shop has been sort of the process people, and we've come together and done we've done it with Troy, we've done it with all of them. In the case of aviation, we've engaged in reviewing their plan. We have language in the OTP around aviation. We certainly have a lot of language in the OTP, and actually all of our modal plans about economic development.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does it meet all the needs of Business Oregon? That's probably a good question, and maybe there's some improvements that we can do there. I think the marine plan is something that, that came out of the meetings around the state and the One Oregon that showed up there. And even before that, though, staff was sort of having a little conversations when Chris was at ODOT and having them with Dave Harlan. Is this something that we can do? I think we're real impressed. Louisiana has one that I think Dave Harlan was sort of drooling about wanting to do something like that. And I think, over time, we thought that the State Marine Board might have been connected because of, I'm going to get this right, submerged vessels or derelict vessels. Derelict vessels. And there had been initially funding in the legislation. Chris spoke to that probably more in our small group meetings, but and that didn't come to pass. So there could be things that were remnants of what had initially started in House Bill 2017 and didn't finish up. But recreation, we're linked. The Gorge Trail. There's recreation that we're part of as well. So whether the language is perfect or not, maybe not, but maybe there are opportunities that we think about coordination.
Commissioner, please.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, it's an excellent question. I think there was some clarification during the legislative discussions. And I think we can use the discipline that plays itself out around the aviation plan in terms of, again, the subject matter experts at the department informing that plan that is adopted by the aviation board. And then I think it comes to this agent and probably is embedded in the Oregon Transportation Plan, because remember, we believe that that's the overarching policy document for statewide policy for the entire transportation system. And I think we can go to school on that. I do not think, in at least my read of certain conversations in front of the Joint Committee on Transportation, was not for the commission to usurp the responsibility of the various boards, but to work with as the subject matter experts. And I think if we just say, for nothing more, we've got a pathway that's been laid out with the Department of Aviation and the way they do business to truly ensure that all voices are at the table. Eventually it does come back, and I think that would come back to this commission, and that meets that responsibility as you now take that and embed it in the OTP.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. Leveraging the expertise of these boards and agencies of government that deal with this all the time. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that's right procedurally?
Director Meeker, and then please, if
sorry.
Commissioner Brand.
Go ahead. I'll let you go ahead and answer his question.
For the Oregon Aviation Plan, we actually will come to you and ask you to put your signature on the front of our plan. So we have no problem with that at all. But what I do think we need work on is what does that mean for y'all? When we approve the plan, we're looking to develop infrastructure for the safety of those users out in the system. Our focus is very structured on, it's very focused on safety. We have economics in our grant process. We do mention it, but we run out of funding before we ever get to an economic development program because the FAA will provide funds only for safety of flight. But when we come to you as a board, so that means we've looked and we very much have racked and stacked our capital infrastructure projects for a very long period, 20 years in the future until we do the next Oregon Aviation Plan, and we continually update it. When we bring it to here, though, it would be, what is it that you want? Is it, when we bring it to you, we, as an Oregon Aviation Board and the Oregon Department of Aviation, are we telling you that we have looked at your projects as well as our projects to see which ones can undergo at the same time so we can share the staging of equipment? Is that one thing that you would like us to look at?
That would be great.
What is it that we have ensured that our new Chapter 8, or Chapter 9, talks about resiliency, that we are strengthening airports that are long, strengthened bridges? Is that what we want you to talk about? I think there's some work on, when we bring something to you for your signature, we need to tell you what we're asking about your signature. What audience have we coordinated with? And I don't think we have a hard list. We kind of feel that, oh yeah, we kind of know each other, and we come to you and you want you to sign on the front cover, but I don't think we are at the point where we can tell you exactly what that means. I don't know what we mean by the word of adoption. It's not in our state coordination agreement, and I think that's work for us that we would like to see happen.
I don't want to hold Julie up anymore.
Okay, you're fine. Go ahead.
Well, no.
If it's still on this subject, I don't, because I'm going to go.
Okay, you're going to go another direction. So, thank you for your deference for a minute. So when I think of a plan that's a coordinated intergovernmental plan, I think it's a plan that is focused on the need for coordination because both entities, like a city and a county in an intergovernmental agreement, trying to, like a planning agreement, trying to plan for an area that's within the urban growth boundary but outside the city, but the city has influence over because it's got, investments or infrastructure or something in it, that would be a kind of a joint planning exercise. So if that's what this is, my own view is that at minimum it should involve things where if we've got things going on and you're trying to do something and they're going to run straight into each other and neither are going to work as well as they could if we talk to each other, we should be talking to each other so we can coordinate those investments to maximize their benefit. So I'm going to stop there because there are other things people want to talk about.
So I'm going to switch gears and go a little bit to the marine side. And although you talk about the recreational side, I see really an opportunity here for us to strengthen our relationship, because if you remember when we were in Lebanon, we had the Frog Ferry come forward and talk about alternative transportation and using the STIF funds to actually provide a commuter ferry service on the river. If that happened, and we're expected to write policy on that as a transportation piece of the network, we really have to have a relationship with you and what is going to be required on the river as far as, the Marine Board. So I look at it as somebody somewhere thought this through a little bit and maybe didn't explain themselves well when they threw out, like that ever happens, threw this into the Section 6. But I think that we need to think about this and really expand on it a little bit, because it is going to be probably our future at some point.
Commissioner Brown, I appreciate you acknowledging that, and I think as we unfold, we'll find there are probably more touch points than we can even think of today between ourselves and this effort. So, thank you.
Well, I think it's probably important to also say that we don't want to own your work. We want to leverage you and us together. So, while the language may be lacks or could have a little more clarity, or maybe we need to work with it a tad, I think the goal is how do we make sure that we're all playing from our strengths and using that level of coordination to put that together. So I don't know if it needs to be said, but I thought I'd say it. We're not interested in now taking on aviation and the Marine Board and just, you know what you know, and we know what we know, and we don't know what you know. So that matters a great deal.
Say that one more time.
It's the known knowns and the known unknowns. Is that kind of the, Director, did you have a comment too? And then Commissioner Callery?
Yeah, Madam Chair, let me just confirm a lot of what I'm hearing, and I think I would endorse that. So this is, for us, we view as someone who doesn't have a marine transportation plan and would like to develop it, you have a little bit of a fresh start of how you would want that to look. And so going through a process like that, I appreciate the recognition that we may have different expertise in being able to leverage that. And on the reverse side is no one wants to do a plan that either just symbolically gets thrown into some larger plan. We want to do a plan that is in partnership so that if changes in certain priorities or decision-making need to occur to meet those goals and objectives, that it's integrated there. So I think that's my way of saying we would strongly appreciate a kind of a partnership model here, perhaps respecting some of the technical expertise, but also your guys' oversight of transportation for all of the states. So it really is, these plans should drive improved, better outcomes. They should influence actual real implementation of things, and you're only going to do that through a partnership model.
Well, I see this as a real opportunity, and I say that because I put 20-some years into the port industry. We were involved in maritime commerce. We were involved in, lately, just before I left the railroad, the commercial and recreational fishing aspects of ports. And I recall at a meeting many years ago when O-Rule had just been established, and Matt had been invited, and I hit him up blindside. I said, okay, when are we going to have a Marine division? And Matt kind of, well, not immediately, but it's past time. We need to understand the role that maritime commerce facilities, whether they're privately owned or they're owned and administered or leased or whatever by a public port authority, that has to be part of our plan, and it's not there. I mean, we simply don't have it. Chris and I have known each other for a long time. Andrea and I have known each other for quite a while. Oregon is a trade-dependent state, and you know, the Port of Portland does its thing, and it's they kind of wave to us as they're going by and saying, well, we're doing this. You know, you got Port of St. Helens finally seeing some activity. Port of Astoria would like to see a lot more activity, but they need a lot of infrastructure. Newport has some challenges. They built an international terminal, and then they've had nothing but controversy within their community about it. Port of Coos Bay, I'll leave my comments off the table. But we have to have a marine plan, and it has to have a focus on maritime commerce and how that ties in intermodally to the rest of the Oregon transportation system. The commercial fishing is really a part of that because a lot of the catch is processed and shipped out, whether it's shipped to domestic sources or whether it's shipped internationally. Recreational boating is kind of a bailiwick unto itself, but it's past time for us to have a good marine plan, and I'm disappointed that we don't have the funds now, but that's something we all have to work on, because I think people need to understand just how dependent we are on international trade through our commercial ports, through our commerce ports. So a lot more I could say, but I won't.
So there's the legislative testimony, and we will. So in terms of being able to assist I know that it doesn't come free. Those planning processes do not happen overnight, it takes internal capacity as well as being able to, the structure of the planning in general. So I think that, yes, I concur. Definitely we need to make sure that that gets done. So we promise, oh, please, yes, Chair, go right ahead.
Thank you. Double thank you. So living on the Columbia River, bi-state coordination is also something that's very important to me. We have trade, our economies are intertwined back and forth across the river. And when I think of this marine transportation plan, I feel like it's something that I don't know how it could work, that maybe should be coordinated with the state of Washington and maybe even up into Idaho, since we share a common body of water that comes down through our states. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that we're talking about coordination here. I love it. I think that, none of us have enough money or enough time. And so any way that we can leverage those things to have a better product at the end is great. And I just want to remind everybody that we should look to our neighborhood or neighboring states as possible partners in this. It's the marine plan at $750,000 is an expensive plan, but if we could bring a couple other states on board with us to really understand, what assets does Oregon have, what assets does Washington have, because businesses don't care if that asset is in another state. So we need to understand what that is, because we should not be building additional assets in Oregon if they can be more readily accessible in Washington or in Idaho. So I guess I just want to toss that out on the floor, just to please remember that we do have possibly some other state partners as we're looking at this marine plan. And so I hope that we consider that.
Wonderful. Commissioner.
Actually, in my past experience working with the Port of Portland on some projects, it's not a formal process, but I know that the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Portland coordinate things. Why should two guys go after the same project when it makes sense to only have one of those? And so why go to the expense? If you can, and they did it with the cars. I know they did it with the cars, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, you take that model of car and we'll take this one, and everybody's going to get a piece of the action. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. Whether it's recreation, whether it's water transportation or whatever else, there's got to be opportunities there for the two states to work together to maximize the benefits of the Columbia River system.
Please.
Yeah, so just one more thing. And I don't want to read it too literally. So first of all, I agree with everyone who said that it's an opportunity, and I embrace, the idea of, understanding the opportunity and trying to do what we can with it. The thing I was going to say is that, this statute also, the kind of plan is looking for here, not just from your entities, but from cities, counties, mass transit districts, they qualify it. It's the legislature has modified. It's just not just a broad multimodal plan. It's a multimodal or a modal or multimodal plan for the movement of people and freight. So this seems to me to have a very strong economic development mission. And so your plans probably all, because our plans do this, your plans probably all have economic development elements, and then some things that might be about, I suppose you can interpret the movement of freight and people to encompass a very broad range of things, so that may be the way to do it. But I think the goal here is to have plans for all of these entities that are listed, including your entities, that are driving mobility and economic growth. I think that's what this is about. So there are lots of other things to be focused on in each of your areas, but this is just my reading of it, is that language wouldn't be there if they weren't looking for these plans to focus heavily on mobility, moving people, and economic growth, which they refer to, as freight, but I think it's about movement of goods and people, right? Goods, services, people, and underline that. I think is implied that there's an economic element to that. Maybe not. Maybe it's just about mobility. So I just mentioned that because we haven't talked about that piece of this, and it's sitting in there, and I think it would lead me to think these plans have to be heavily focused at minimum on mobility of people and freight, and maybe more broadly on economic growth. So.
The only thing I'd add to that is that I think it's also about accessibility. So the word multimodal, I think, is talking, I guess I go back to that community connection.
Yeah.
And so it's really about accessibility so the community thrives, which is, economic development is key to that, but there's more than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right.
And I think there also was a lot of discussion about the how do we not be fragmented in how we are looking at the state transportation system as a whole too. So how are we ourselves breaking down those silos, understanding each other's role, and then being able to coordinate that in a meaningful way that gets to these outcomes. I really appreciate the comments about our sister states. We've been working to strengthen our partnership with Washington and California, knowing that all, whether it's a road usage charge or resiliency or, we share an economy there too. We share people. And so how do we look at that planning collectively? I like the idea of adding Idaho. So there's, so I think we throw it in. We did promise an hour. I know we did start a little bit late. So should we dive into next steps or any parting comments that folks?
I think next steps.
Yeah, that would be great. So
what
Director.
What are the takeaways?
Yeah, I'll turn it back to you. And
Thank you for that. Well, I think the next steps are sending this conversation back to our smart people, as Director Harder indicated, because I think that's prudent. And to your point, what have we identified? What exists? What are the known knowns, known unknowns, so on and so forth. But then and really start to parse out the language here, because again, there are several different charges embedded in the language. And we might have to have some conversations about clarity of purpose with the Joint Committee on Legislation, just given that some of us are in different stages of development here. So to bring things together may take a little bit of time, but making sure we have a clear understanding what they're looking for. I think Vice Chair Van Brocklen is correct. It is about the movement of people and goods and services and freight. I believe that's what it comes down to. And I think if you look at the various plans we have, just using that term to cover everything that we may have, I think embedded in all those are opportunities to move freight and commerce as well as people. We just need to do, I think, the next level of scan to parse out, well, here's where we scan right now. How can we make it a little more cohesive so we're not running independent games, we're integrating this conversation. I think that's the first step. And then as we move forward, as you get to the way this bill is written, eventually we get to that conversation about projects looking 20 years out with the available money. I don't know how difficult of conversation that is. I'll tell you from a transportation perspective, given the assets that we have, plays very well when you go to the hard assets of a bridge, even pavements. But it gets a little bit softer when we start talking safety type investments. And I'm wondering, specific to the assets within each and every one of your portfolios, how does that play itself out? Can aviation really look out 20 years and have that list? If you are, you're blessed. But again, what are the implications of that, and how do we prepare for that? Because that is a charge embedded in this document specifically to the agencies identified here today.
Commissioner, go ahead.
I just had one thing to mention. It's not so much on the aviation, at least today, but I think as we're talking about freight and commerce, just to kind of throw this in there, as we're talking more about this interconnected conversation with all state agencies about the future of our state and its economic prosperity and the impact it's going to have on the rest of Oregonians, I think we really have to try to figure out what is our most valuable asset. And typically valuable assets in any plot of land is typically its natural resources. And since there's been so much interest around this innovation and CLT and forestry and timber industry. I think if we really, I feel like that's going to play an important piece into our future prosperity for our state. And given the fact that our higher ed institution like OSU and others that are focusing heavily on the engineering and innovation and opportunities around this sector, I think it plays a significant role in terms of how we rope in all these different modes of transportation together, intermingled with new economic opportunity models in small communities as well as the major urban communities. I think it can have a significant impact. I mean, we look at things like this, which is not authentic, but the question is, where was it sourced? Where did it come from? Was it made here? Was it created here? Was it manufactured here? Was it engineered here? Those are the jobs that these public dollars could actually be circulating back into our economy for all the residents and people that pay into this system. So I think it's a bigger conversation, but I think we probably want to start somewhere that's right here in home and figure out how do we revitalize a system that built our state's economy in the 20th century in a 21st century fashion.
Commissioner Simpson, I don't know if that was just perfect timing. So on, I think it was Tuesday, we sponsored with the Tallwood Design Institute a mass timber summit focused specifically on kind of less about the technology, because we got a lot of other groups, and this one was really geared towards those of us in economic development. How do we grow those industries? How do we move the goods? Transportation in that topic is obviously of importance, of where we make investments. How do we get product from a rural community to an urban community? So I appreciate what you said right there.
Okay. Oh, don't be shy.
So thank you very much. I'm Janine Bulek, and I'm the Facilities Program Manager for the Marine Board. So thank you for having us here. As I'm listening to all of this, I see a lot of overlap for our agency. And there's things that I'm not sure you're aware of. Like, do you know you received a grant from us to build a boat ramp? We funded a boat ramp that you guys have, and it's currently being managed by I think it's OTIC but it's at the Santiam Junction. But your bridge crossings are very, very popular, unimproved boating access locations. So there's a nexus there where a lot of those activities are taking place that really hasn't been discussed. And I think that's a really good opportunity for us to have those discussions on, is that a location that ODOT wants? Is there an alternative? As you do bridge work, is there a way to improve that safety? You know, the maritime, we work very closely with ports. On the recreational side, the commercial and the recreation happen often right in the same basin. So, you know, in aviation, there are a lot of airports that are near boating facilities. You know, so I'm listening to all this, and I see a lot of overlap, a lot of ways that we can expand our collaboration or build collaboration. So I really think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to partner on this. And although, you know, a lot of times recreation is kind of that downplayed item, you know, recreational boaters contribute significantly to the economy. The National Marine Manufacturing Association has estimated it's about $1.6 billion of an industry in Oregon. Just to give you an idea, the lower Willamette River, which is basically the Willamette in Portland, has over 250,000 use days by recreational boats. You know, so it's a very popular thing, and there's a lot of that interaction. So when, you know, we talk about the frog ferries, a lot of the water taxi conversations coming up, opening up the locks, we're definitely interested because recreational boaters are going to be on that waterway. And how it overlaps, I just see a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate on these things.
Well, I think that's you know, for many communities in the state of Oregon, if it were not for recreation and tourism, they would not survive. So that is an important piece. And what I hear you also saying is, how do we impact each other's you know, lines of business too? I mean, so I see opportunities for us to even have better communication. So certified smart people, getting together and maybe even jotting down some of these ways in which we can identify that overlap and maybe what a planning process might look like. And I know that this is something that we do a lot of, and so maybe there's a way that we can encapsulate that bit back in and be maybe the, you know, we we are the recipients maybe of that information, can put it together a bit and then give it back out to the group. And I don't want to overcommit,
No,
but also unless somebody else wants to raise their hand.
Madam Chair, I think that's fair. I think Mr. Cummings maybe on point here has really started a document that I think starts to do that, right? I just would say we start to extend that out a little bit and try to cover some of the issues that were broached today. So I think the work has begun. And again, I think we have several more dates with each other in our future.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming.
For the partnership and for making time. Yeah, more dates.
Who's got the bill?
We're going Dutch. All right. Yes, McDonald's. How do you feel about across the street? All right. So is there any, okay?
Madam Chair, we've completed our business.
All right. So with that, thank you very much. We are adjourned.